The blood trickling down Deanna Daniels' cheek reflected the harsh afternoon sun as she stumbled backward into the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs. The year was 1878, and like most frontier towns in the Arizona Territory, disputes were often settled with violence but rarely so publicly against a woman. Deanna's husband Frank stood over her, his face contorted with drunken rage, fist cocked back for another blow. "You embarrass me again, woman, and I swear to God." Frank's words slurred as he swayed slightly. Deanna clutched her face, the taste of copper filling her mouth. At 23, she had already endured 3 years of marriage that had descended from hopeful to horrifying. Her simple calico dress was now stained with dirt and blood, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins. "Please, Frank," she whispered, aware of the townsfolk who had stopped to stare but wouldn't intervene. That was the unspoken rule in Cottonwood Springs: a man's business with his wife was his own. Frank lunged forward, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "Get up. You think I'm done with you? Let her go." The voice cut through the murmurs of the gathered crowd like a knife. Deanna turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He stepped forward, revealing a dusty black hat, weathered denim, and eyes as blue and hard as desert turquoise. A stranger, a cowboy she had never seen before. "This ain't your concern, mister," Frank snarled, his grip tightening on Deanna's arm. The cowboy's hand rested casually on his holstered revolver as he closed the distance between them. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each deliberate step. When a man beats a woman in the street, it becomes everyone's concern. His voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable edge of steel. "Let her go now." Frank laughed, a cruel sound that made Deanna flinch. "Or what? This is my wife. I'll handle her how I please." The cowboy's expression didn't change as he spoke. "Not while I'm breathing." Those 4 words hung in the air, a challenge that no man in the West could ignore. The crowd grew silent, the only sound the distant piano from the saloon and the creak of wood as onlookers shifted nervously. Deanna felt her heart hammer in her chest. No one had ever stood up for her before, not against Frank. She didn't know whether to feel hope or terror at what might happen next. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Frank released Deanna's arm to face the stranger squarely. "Name's Dalton Shaw." The cowboy removed his hand from his gun, instead crossing his arms across his chest in a deliberate show of calm. "Just rode into town looking for work and a quiet drink. Wasn't expecting to find a coward beating on a lady." Frank's face darkened to a dangerous shade of purple. "Coward. I'll kill you where you stand." His hand dropped to the rusty revolver at his hip, but before he could draw, Dalton moved with startling speed. A swift strike to Frank's wrist sent the gun clattering into the dirt, and a second blow to his stomach doubled him over. Frank wheezed and stumbled backward. "That's enough." Sheriff Miller's voice boomed as he pushed through the crowd, hand on his own pistol. "What in blazes is going on here? This stranger attacked me." Frank pointed accusingly at Dalton, struggling to regain his composure. The sheriff looked from Frank to Dalton, then to Deanna with her bruised face. His expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Daniels, you all right?" Deanna hesitated, feeling all eyes upon her. 3 years of silence and fear weighed against the sudden possibility of speaking truth. She looked at the cowboy who had stepped between her and harm, and something inside her found courage. "My husband hit me, Sheriff," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "This man stopped him." Sheriff Miller sighed heavily. "Frank, you've been drinking again. Go sleep it off at Mabel's boarding house tonight. I won't have you causing more trouble. She's my wife. You can't." "I can and I am," the sheriff cut him off. "Go now or spend the night in my jail, your choice." Frank glared at Deanna with such hatred that she involuntarily stepped back. "This isn't over," he hissed before stumbling away down the street. The crowd began to disperse, the entertainment concluded. Sheriff Miller turned to Dalton. "Don't know you, stranger." "Just passing through," Dalton replied evenly. "Looking for honest work." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Johnson's ranch might be hiring. Outside of town, head north." He turned to Deanna. "Mrs. Daniels, do you need Doc Evans to take a look at you?" Deanna touched her swollen cheek. "No, Sheriff, thank you." As the sheriff walked away, Deanna found herself alone with the cowboy who had intervened. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight flecks of gray in his dark brown hair. He wasn't young, perhaps 35, but there was a vitality to him that made age irrelevant. "Thank you," she said softly. "But you shouldn't have done that. Frank will. He won't forget this." Dalton Shaw studied her face. Not with pity, Deanna noted with surprise, but with a quiet respect. "Some things a man can't just ride past, madam. You have somewhere safe to go." Deanna straightened her shoulders. "My sister's place. It's just down the street." Dalton nodded. "I'll walk you there." They moved in silence through the dusty street. Deanna could feel the stares of townsfolk through windows and doorways. By morning, everyone would know what had happened. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I don't know this town," Dalton said eventually. "Is there law here that works, or just a man with a badge?" Deanna gave a small, bitter laugh. "Sheriff Miller is a good man, but around here, what happens between a husband and wife?" She trailed off. "Isn't considered anyone else's business," Dalton finished for her. "I've seen that thinking before." They reached a small, tidy house at the edge of town. Before Deanna could knock, the door flew open, and a woman with the same chestnut hair but sharper features rushed out. "Deanna, Mrs. Patterson told me what happened." She embraced Deanna carefully before turning suspicious eyes on Dalton. "Who is this?" "Deborah, this is Mr. Shaw. He helped me when Frank—" Deanna couldn't finish. Understanding dawned on Deborah's face. "Come inside, both of you, quickly." The interior of the small home was modest but clean, with simple furniture and faded curtains. A pot of stew bubbled on the stove, filling the air with a savory aroma that reminded Deanna she hadn't eaten since morning. "Sit," Deborah commanded, pointing to a wooden chair. She dipped a cloth in cool water and gently began to clean Deanna's face. "Did he hurt you anywhere else?" Deanna shook her head, embarrassed by Dalton's presence during such an intimate moment. "Just my pride." "Pride heals," Dalton said quietly from where he stood by the door, hat in hand. "But you should tell the sheriff everything, not just about today." Deanna stiffened. "What do you mean? I've seen men like your husband before. This wasn't the first time, was it?" Deborah's eyes flashed angrily. "It's been going on for over a year. I've begged her to leave him." "Deborah, please," Deanna whispered, mortified. "No, Deanna, someone finally stood up for you today. Maybe it's time you listened." Deborah turned to Dalton. "Thank you for what you did, Mr. Shaw. Not many would interfere." Dalton nodded. "I should go find a place for the night." "The Wellington Hotel has clean rooms," Deborah suggested, "and they don't ask too many questions." As Dalton turned to leave, Deanna suddenly called out, "Mr. Shaw." When he looked back, she continued, "Frank, he doesn't forget slights, and he has friends. Please be careful." A slight smile crossed Dalton's face, softening the hard lines. "I always am, Mrs. Daniels. You do the same." After he left, Deborah sat across from her sister. "Deanna, this can't go on. Frank will kill you one day." Deanna stared at her bruised hands. "What choice do I have?" "I have no money, no profession. The law says everything I own belongs to him. You could leave, go back east to Aunt Martha's. And live as what? A charity case, a failed wife?" Deanna shook her head. "This is my life now." Deborah reached across the table and gripped her sister's hand. "Only if you choose it to be." That night, Deanna lay awake on her sister's spare bed, replaying the events of the day, the public humiliation, yes, but also the unexpected intervention of a stranger. "Not while I'm breathing." Such simple words, yet they had changed everything. For the first time in years, Deanna allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she had resigned herself to. At dawn, she rose and helped Deborah with breakfast. Her sister taught at the town's small school, leaving Deanna alone with her thoughts for the day. She knew she should return to the house she shared with Frank, but the thought filled her with dread. Instead, she swept Deborah's floors, washed the breakfast dishes, and tried not to think about what would happen when Frank inevitably came looking for her. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Heart pounding, she approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "Dalton Shaw, madam." Relief flooded through her as she opened the door. The cowboy stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking somewhat less dusty than the day before. "Mr. Shaw, I didn't expect to see you again. Wanted to make sure you were all right." His eyes traced the bruise that had bloomed fully on her cheek overnight. "I'm fine. Please come in." Deanna stepped aside, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and loosely pinned hair. "Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be welcome." She busied herself at the stove, aware of his presence filling the small kitchen. "Did you find work?" "I did. Johnson hired me on. Seems they're short-handed since some trouble with rustlers a month back." Deanna nodded as she poured the coffee. "The Johnson spread is good. Mrs. Johnson is fair to her hands. You know them. Everyone knows everyone in Cottonwood Springs." She handed him the steaming cup. "Which is why I'm surprised I've never seen you before." Dalton took a careful sip. "I move around." "Never stayed in one place too long. Running from something?" The question slipped out before Deanna could stop herself. "I'm sorry, that was forward of me. No, it's a fair question." Dalton set his cup down. "Not running from exactly, more like searching for something I haven't found yet." The honesty in his voice touched something in Deanna. "And what is that?" "A place where things make sense, where right is right and wrong is wrong." He smiled slightly. "Sounds foolish when I say it out loud." "No," Deanna said softly, "it doesn't sound foolish at all." A moment of understanding passed between them, broken by another knock, this one forceful enough to rattle the door on its hinges. "Deanna, open this door right now." Frank's voice sent ice through her veins. She froze, the coffee pot still in her hand. Dalton was on his feet immediately, his hand moving to his gun. "No," Deanna whispered, setting down the pot with trembling hands. "Let me handle this." She moved to the door but didn't open it. "Go away, Frank. I'm staying with Deborah." "Like hell you are." "You're my wife and you're coming home now." "I think you should leave," Dalton called out, positioning himself beside Deanna. "Mrs. Daniels doesn't want to see you." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a burst of profanity. "Is that the son of a bitch from yesterday?" "You let him in my wife's house." "It's my sister's house," Deanna replied, finding strength in Dalton's presence. "And yes, Mr. Shaw is here as my guest. I'll kill you both." The door shuddered as Frank threw his weight against it. Dalton drew his revolver. "Stand back, Deanna." "No." She grabbed his arm. "No more violence, please." The door splintered at the hinges as Frank slammed into it again. One more hit and it would give way. Dalton holstered his gun and instead reached for the rifle mounted over the fireplace. He worked the lever, chambering around with a distinctive click that carried through the door. "Daniels," he called out. "I've got a Winchester pointed at this door. Next time you hit it, you'll catch a bullet. Is that what you want?" The pounding stopped. "This isn't over," Frank snarled through the wood. "She's my wife, the law's on my side." "Maybe," Dalton replied calmly, "but right now I'm between you and her, and I meant what I said yesterday." They heard Frank spit on the porch. "You can't watch her forever, Cowboy." His footsteps receded, and moments later they heard a horse galloping away. Deanna sagged against the wall, her heart thundering in her chest. "He'll be back, with friends, probably." Dalton carefully unloaded the rifle and returned it to its place. "Then we need to consider your options." "There are no options," Deanna said bitterly. "He's right, the law is on his side, a wife is property like a horse or a plow." "Not everywhere," Dalton said. "There are places I can't just leave," she interrupted. "This is my home, my sister is here, and even if I could, Frank would track me down." Dalton studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "What if there was a way to make him let you go?" "Nothing would make Frank let me go. His pride wouldn't allow it." "Pride can be a powerful motivator, both ways." Dalton picked up his hat. "I need to get to the Johnson ranch, but I'll be back this evening to check on you. Keep the door barred." After he left, Deanna repaired the door as best she could, wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. She moved through the day in a fog, jumping at every sound. What had Dalton meant? What way could possibly make Frank release her? Divorce was virtually impossible for a woman to obtain, especially with no evidence of abandonment. And Deanna knew Frank would never grant her one not out of love, but out of spite. When Deborah returned from school, Deanna told her about both visits. Her sister's face grew grim. "You can't stay here, Deanna. It's not safe for either of us." "Where would I go?" "I don't know, but that Cowboy is right. There has to be a way out." That evening, Dalton returned as promised, this time with Sheriff Miller in tow. Deanna let them in, confusion written on her face. Mrs. Daniels, the sheriff said, removing his hat. I think we need to have a conversation about your husband. They sat around Deborah's small table, Deanna's hands clenched tightly in her lap. What about him? Sheriff Miller cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Shaw here has made some allegations about ongoing abuse. Deanna shot Dalton a betrayed look, but he met her gaze steadily. Tell him, Deanna, all of it. The sheriff leaned forward. Mrs. Daniels, I've known Frank a long time. He's always been hot-headed, especially with liquor in him. But if what Mr. Shaw suggests is true, if he's been hurting you regularly, then something needs to be done. What could possibly be done? Deanna asked bitterly. He's my husband. The law does give a husband certain rights, Miller admitted reluctantly. But no man has the right to beat his wife half to death, even in Cottonwood Springs. Deanna looked from the sheriff to Dalton, then to her sister, who stood silently by the stove. Slowly, with a voice that grew stronger with each word, she began to tell the truth she had hidden for so long. About the first time Frank had hit her, 6 months into their marriage. About the broken wrist he had explained away as a fall from a horse. About the nights she had slept in the barn to escape his drunken rage. By the time she finished, tears streamed silently down her face, but her back was straight, her dignity intact. Sheriff Miller looked deeply troubled. I can talk to the judge, he said finally. In cases of extreme cruelty, there have been exceptions made, divorces granted. Hope flickered briefly in Deanna's chest, only to be extinguished by reality. Frank would never agree to appear before a judge, and even if he did, it would be his word against mine. Not exactly, Dalton said quietly. He turned to the sheriff. Tell her what you told me today. Miller shifted uncomfortably. Frank's been in trouble before, his first wife. There were rumors she didn't just die of fever like he claimed, nothing I could prove, but… He shook his head. And he's got outstanding debts all over town, gambling losses mostly. What are you suggesting? Deanna asked. Dalton leaned forward. Frank cares about 3 things, his pride, his freedom, and his reputation. We can use that. As night fell, the 4 of them crafted a plan. It was risky, possibly dangerous, but for the first time in years, Deanna felt something like hope taking root. She would need courage more than she had ever needed before. You don't have to do this, Deborah said as they prepared for bed. You could just leave, go somewhere he couldn't find you. Deanna looked out the window at the stars scattered across the vast Arizona sky. No, I'm done running, done hiding. Whatever happens tomorrow, at least I'll have stood up for myself. Morning brought clear skies and a determination that steadied Deanna's hands as she dressed in her best gown, a blue calico she had sewn herself when she still believed in the promise of her marriage. Deborah helped pin her hair, and together they walked to the sheriff's office where Dalton and Miller waited. He's at the saloon, the sheriff informed them. Been there since it opened, drinking and running his mouth about both of you. Deanna nodded, steeling herself. Then it's time. The 4 of them crossed the street to the Double Eagle Saloon. Even this early, the establishment was half full with miners, cowboys, and the assorted drifters that populated any frontier town. Frank sat at a corner table, playing cards with 3 other men. He looked up as they entered, his face darkening when he saw Deanna. Well, well, he sneered, tossing down his cards. The wayward wife returns. Come to beg forgiveness? Deanna walked directly to his table, aware that every eye in the saloon was fixed on her. No, Frank. I've come to offer you a deal, he laughed incredulously. A deal? You've got nothing to offer, woman. I want a divorce, Deanna said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the now silent saloon, and I'm willing to pay for it. Frank's laughter died. Have you lost your mind? There'll be no divorce. Now get out of here before I teach you another lesson about respect. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. That's enough, Frank. Hear her out. Frank's eyes narrowed as he took in the sheriff, Dalton, and Deborah arrayed behind Deanna. What is this, some kind of ambush? This is me giving you a choice, Deanna said. Agree to a divorce right now in front of witnesses and you get 2 things. First, this. She placed a small leather pouch on the table. The clinking of coins inside made Frank's eyebrows rise. That's $300. Every penny I've saved in secret over the past 3 years. Frank reached for the pouch, but Deanna was faster, snatching it back. Not yet. First, you agree publicly to let me go. And why would I do that? For a few coins, Frank sneered, but his eyes lingered on the pouch. Because of the second part of the deal, Dalton said, stepping forward. The sheriff here has some interesting questions about your first wife's death, and about certain debts you've failed to pay. Seems the Wilcox brothers are particularly interested in collecting what you owe them. Frank's face paled slightly. The Wilcox brothers were notorious loan sharks known for their violent collection methods. This is blackmail, he hissed. This is a business arrangement, Deanna corrected him. You give me my freedom, you get money and a fresh start somewhere else. You refuse, and by sundown, you'll have both the law and the Wilcox brothers looking for you. Frank's eyes darted around the saloon, taking in the dozens of witnesses to his humiliation. His hand clenched and unclenched on the table. You think I care what these people think? You're my wife. Mine to do with as I please. Not anymore, Deanna said softly. Not while Mr. Shaw is breathing, and not while I'm finally standing up for myself. A tense silence filled the saloon. Even the bartender had stopped wiping glasses to watch the confrontation unfold. Finally, Frank's shoulders sagged. Fine, he spat. You want freedom, take it. You were always more trouble than you were worth. Deanna placed the money pouch on the table again. Say it clearly, Frank, in front of everyone. Frank's jaw worked as he struggled with his pride. Finally, he stood, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. I, Frank Daniels, hereby release Deanna Daniels from our marriage. I want nothing more to do with her. She is no longer my wife. He snatched up the pouch. Satisfied, almost, Sheriff Miller said. He placed a document on the table. Sign this. It's a statement renouncing all claims on Mrs. Daniels and agreeing to a divorce on grounds of abandonment by you. Frank looked like he might explode, but after glancing at Dalton's steady gaze, he grabbed the pen and scrawled his signature. There. Now leave me be. One more thing, Deanna said, her voice quiet but firm. You'll leave Cottonwood Springs today and never return. You can't force me to the stage to Tucson Leaves at noon, Sheriff Miller interrupted. I strongly suggest you be on it. Unless you'd prefer to discuss your gambling debts with the Wilcox brothers in person, Frank glared at them all, hatred burning in his eyes. But he was beaten, and he knew it. Without another word, he stalked from the saloon, shoving past Deanna hard enough to make her stumble. As the door swung shut behind him, a weight seemed to lift from Deanna's shoulders. She turned to find the entire saloon staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to admiration. Dalton stood beside her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You did it, he said softly. Deanna took a deep breath, feeling truly free for the first time in years. We did it. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Deanna's life. True to the sheriff's prediction, Frank left on the noon stage, though not before spreading vicious rumors about Deanna and the interfering cowboy who had stolen his wife. But to Frank's obvious disappointment, the townsfolk largely sided with Deanna. The public beating had turned many against him, and Deanna's quiet dignity in the aftermath won her surprising support. With Deborah's encouragement, Deanna used a small portion of her remaining savings to rent a tiny room above the milliner's shop, and took a position as assistant to the town's seamstress, Mrs. Whitaker. Her skilled needlework quickly made her indispensable, and for the first time she had money that was truly her own. Dalton continued working at the Johnson Ranch, riding into town most Sundays to attend church, something he admitted he hadn't done regularly in years. Invariably, he would find a reason to visit Deanna afterward, sometimes bringing a small gift. Wildflowers, a ribbon for her hair, or once, a beautiful hand-carved wooden comb. They developed a friendship that was careful, proper, but undeniably warm. Deanna was conscious of the town's watchful eyes. A woman separated but not yet divorced was still subject to scrutiny, but she found herself caring less about gossip with each passing day. You look different, Deborah observed one Sunday afternoon as they shared tea in Deanna's small room. Happier. Younger even. Deanna touched her cheek, now healed completely. I feel different, like I can breathe again. And does a certain cowboy have anything to do with that? Deborah teased. Diana felt a blush rise to her cheeks. Dalton has been a good friend, nothing more. But you'd like it to be more, Deborah persisted. Anyone with eyes can see how you look at each other. It's complicated, Deanna sighed. I'm still technically married, and I don't know if I'll ever be ready to trust a man again, not after Frank. Dalton isn't Frank, Deborah said gently. Not all men are monsters, Deanna. I know that, but Deanna struggled to articulate her fears. What if I'm drawn to the wrong kind? What if there's something in me that brings out the worst in a husband? Deborah reached across the table to squeeze her sister's hand. What Frank did was never your fault. Never. Deanna nodded, though the doubt lingered. After Deborah left, she sat by her small window, watching the street below as the town prepared for evening. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, but slowly. Judge Parker only traveled through Cottonwood Springs once every few months, and the next circuit wasn't due for another 6 weeks. A knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found Dalton standing there, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Mr. Shaw. This is a surprise, Mrs. Daniels. He cleared his throat. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all. Please come in. She stepped aside, suddenly conscious of the room's cramped dimensions and simple furnishings. Dalton entered, his tall frame making the space seem even smaller. I can't stay long. Mrs. Johnson has asked me to escort her to Prescott tomorrow on business, and we leave at first light. Oh, Deanna tried to hide her disappointment. How long will you be gone? A week, maybe 2. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I wanted to give you this before I left. He extended his hand, revealing a small silver locket on a delicate chain. Deanna's breath caught. Dalton, I couldn't possibly, please. It was my mother's. He opened it to reveal a tiny pressed flower inside. Desert primrose. They bloom after the harshest conditions, surviving where nothing else can. His eyes met hers. It reminded me of you. Deanna's heart fluttered as she accepted the gift. It's beautiful, thank you. I was hoping, when I return, perhaps we could speak more openly about certain things. What things? She asked, though she knew perfectly well what he meant. Dalton stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that always seemed to surround him. About the future. My future, and if you're willing, perhaps a future we might share. Deanna looked up into his face, seeing hope and uncertainty there in equal measure. This good man, who had stepped between her and harm without a thought for his own safety, was offering her his heart. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. I would like that conversation very much, she said softly. When you return. Dalton's smile transformed his usually serious face. Gently, he took the locket from her hand and moved behind her to fasten it around her neck. His fingers were surprisingly gentle for a working cowboy, brushing lightly against her skin as he secured the clasp. Deanna closed her eyes at the contact, a shiver running through her that had nothing to do with fear. Until then, he murmured, stepping back respectfully. After he left, Deanna touched the locket at her throat, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. For the first time since her ill-fated wedding day, she allowed herself to imagine a different kind of marriage, one built on respect and kindness rather than possession and fear. The days of Dalton's absence stretched long before her. Deanna threw herself into her work at the seamstress shop, grateful for the distraction. News arrived that Frank had been seen in Tucson, apparently heading south toward Mexico. The knowledge that he was truly gone from her life should have brought only relief, but Deanna found herself unexpectedly pensive. Not because she missed Frank, she didn't, but because his absence forced her to confront the emptiness in her life that predated him. You're miles away today, Mrs. Whitaker observed as Deanna stitched a wedding dress for the banker's daughter. Something troubling you? Deanna smiled apologetically, just thinking about the past and the future. The older woman nodded knowingly. Thinking about that handsome cowboy who's been calling on you, more like. Deanna felt herself blush. Is it that obvious to these old eyes? Yes, Mrs. Whitaker adjusted her spectacles. But it does my heart good to see. After what that brute put you through, you deserve some happiness. I'm not sure I know what would make me happy anymore, Deanna admitted. For so long, I just focused on surviving each day. That's how it goes sometimes. Mrs. Whittaker's needle flashed in the sunlight streaming through the shop window. We get so used to the storm that we don't know what to do when the sun comes out. 2 weeks passed with no word from Dalton. Deanna tried not to worry. Travel in the territories was unpredictable at best, and the road to Prescott was known for delays. Still, each day that passed without his return left her more anxious. Then on a stormy afternoon when thunder rolled across the valley, the shop door burst open to reveal Deborah, her face ashen. "Deanna, you need to come quickly. It's Dalton, he's been hurt." Deanna's heart seemed to stop. "Hurt? How? Where is he?" "At Doc Evans' office. He and Mrs. Johnson were ambushed on their return journey. Robbers, they think." Deanna barely heard the rest as she grabbed her shawl and rushed into the rain-soaked street, her mind filled with terrible possibilities as she ran toward the doctor's small office at the edge of town. Was Dalton dying? Was he already gone? The thought of losing him before they'd even had a chance to begin something together was unbearable. The doctor's assistant, a young man named Timothy, looked up in surprise as Deanna burst through the door, rain dripping from her clothes and hair. "Mrs. Daniels." "You're soaked through. Where is he?" Deanna demanded, ignoring the comment. "Where's Dalton Shaw?" "In the back room, but the doctor is with him now," and Deanna pushed past him, her fear overwhelming any sense of propriety. The back room was small, dominated by an examination table where Dalton lay shirtless, his torso wrapped in bandages. Dr. Evans looked up from his work with a frown. "Mrs. Daniels, this is highly irregular. Let her stay, Doc," Dalton said weakly, his eyes finding Deanna's. "Please." The doctor sighed but stepped back, allowing Deanna to approach. She moved to Dalton's side, taking in his pale face, the bruise darkening his left temple and the blood-stained bandages wrapped around his midsection. "What happened?" she whispered, taking his hand. "Ambush," Dalton replied, wincing as he shifted slightly. "5 men stopped our wagon about 10 miles outside of town. They were waiting for us." "Waiting specifically?" Deanna asked, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. Dalton's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them. "Yes. They called me by name before they even saw my face, said they had a message from Frank Daniels." Diana's blood ran cold. "Frank did this, but he's gone in Mexico by now. Apparently not far enough that he couldn't hire men to settle his score." Dalton attempted a smile that turned into a grimace of pain. "Don't worry, they look worse than I do." "Barely," Dr. Evans muttered. 2 bullet wounds, 3 broken ribs, and a concussion. It's a miracle you made it back to town at all." "Mrs. Johnson," Deanna suddenly remembered. "Is she shaken but unharmed?" the doctor assured her. "They weren't interested in her, just Mr. Shaw here." Deanna felt sick with guilt. "This is my fault, all of it. Frank would never have come after you if not for me." Dalton's grip on her hand tightened. "No, this is Frank's doing, not yours." "Never yours." Dr. Evans cleared his throat. "Mrs. Daniels, Mr. Shaw needs rest now. You can return in the morning." "I'm staying," Deanna said with uncharacteristic firmness, "all night if I need to." The doctor looked like he might argue, then sighed in resignation. "As you wish. But try not to excite him. Those bullet wounds were deep, and he's lost a lot of blood." After the doctor left to check on another patient, Deanna pulled a chair close to Dalton's bedside. Rain pattered against the window as twilight deepened into night. She held his hand, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, each breath a reassurance that he lived. "You should go home," Dalton said eventually, his voice rough with pain. "Get some rest." "No," Deanna squeezed his hand. "I won't leave you." "Stubborn woman," he murmured, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "I learned from the best." She reached out to brush a lock of hair from his forehead. "Why did you do it, Dalton, that first day in the street? Why risk yourself for a stranger?" He was silent for so long that Deanna thought he might have drifted to sleep. Finally, he spoke, his voice so low she had to lean closer to hear. "My mother," he said. "My father was like Frank, violent, cruel. He beat her regularly and no one ever stepped in, not once in all those years." His jaw tightened at the memory. "She died from it eventually, a blow to the head that caused bleeding inside her skull. I was 14. Deanna's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." I promised myself then that I'd never stand by and watch a woman suffer if I could help it. His eyes, though clouded with pain, held hers intently. When I saw Frank hit you that day, I wasn't really seeing him. I was seeing my father and you. You were seeing your mother, Deanna finished for him. Dalton nodded slightly. At first. But then I got to know you, Deanna, your strength. Your kindness, and I started seeing just you. Deanna felt tears well in her eyes. She leaned forward and after a moment's hesitation pressed her lips gently to his forehead. Rest now. We can talk more tomorrow. Dalton closed his eyes, his breathing gradually deepening as he drifted into sleep. Deanna maintained her vigil through the night, thinking about the path that had brought them both to this moment. Two wounded souls, finding in each other something neither had dared hope for. A second chance. Morning brought Dr. Evans back to check Dalton's wounds. The fever's down, he announced after his examination. If we can prevent infection, he should recover fully, given time and rest. How much time? Dalton asked, clearly already impatient with confinement. At least 2 weeks before you even think about getting back on a horse, the doctor said sternly. And that's being optimistic. After the doctor left, Deanna helped Dalton sit up to take some broth. You heard him. 2 weeks of rest. I can't stay here that long, Dalton protested. Doc Evans needs this room for other patients, and I need to get back to the Johnson Ranch. Mrs. Johnson already sent word that your job will be waiting when you're well, Deanna interrupted. And as for where you'll stay. She hesitated, then continued with determination. You'll come to my place. Dalton's eyebrows rose. Deanna, people would talk. Let them. She lifted her chin. Deborah will stay with us as chaperone if that makes you feel better, but you need someone to look after you, and I need to know you're safe. The truth was, Deanna couldn't bear the thought of Dalton being vulnerable while Frank's hired men might still be looking to finish the job. Her small room above the milliner's shop was easily defensible, with only one staircase for access, and she and Deborah could take turns keeping watch. Dalton studied her face, seeing the determination there. All right, he conceded finally, but only until I can stand without feeling like I'm going to pass out. 3 days later, with the help of Sheriff Miller and the doctor's assistant, they moved Dalton to Deanna's room. The small space became even more cramped with the addition of a cot for Dalton and a pallet on the floor for Deborah, but Deanna didn't mind the closeness. For the first time since leaving Frank, she felt something like a family surrounding her. Dalton proved to be a difficult patient, constantly trying to do more than his healing body would allow. Deanna found herself alternately scolding and encouraging him, developing a comfortable familiarity that would have scandalized Cottonwood Springs' more conservative residents if they had witnessed it. But behind the closed door of her room, with Deborah as their buffer against impropriety, Deanna discovered a new version of herself emerging, one who laughed easily, spoke her mind, and gradually allowed her heart to open to possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. As the days passed, Dalton's strength returned. He began taking short walks with Deanna around the room, then down the stairs, and eventually along the main street of town. The townsfolk, who had initially raised eyebrows at the arrangement, gradually accepted the sight of the injured cowboy and the soon-to-be divorced woman walking arm in arm. It helped that Sheriff Miller made a point of tipping his hat to them publicly, conferring his tacit approval on their unusual situation. The circuit judge arrives next week, Deanna mentioned one evening as she changed Dalton's bandages. His wounds were healing well, the angry red lines fading to pink. Sheriff Miller says he'll put my case forward immediately. Dalton watched her face as she worked, her fingers gentle against his skin. Are you ready for it, to be truly free of Frank? More than ready, Deanna replied without hesitation. Though I admit I'm nervous about facing a judge, you've faced down worse, Dalton reminded her. Much worse. Deanna secured the fresh bandage and sat back, studying him. In the 3 weeks of his recovery, she had come to know every line of his face, the exact shade of his eyes, the way his voice deepened when he spoke of things that mattered to him. She had also noticed how carefully he maintained a certain physical distance between them, never overstepping the boundaries of propriety despite their unusual living arrangement. "Dalton," she said suddenly, "when the divorce is final, what happens then?" He met her gaze steadily. "What do you want to happen?" The directness of the question took her by surprise. Deanna had spent so many years subduing her own desires that identifying them now felt almost foreign. But in the quiet of the evening, with Deborah out visiting a friend and no one to hear but the man who had changed the course of her life, she found the courage to speak truth. "I want to start a new life," she said softly, "one where I make my own choices. Where I'm valued as a person, not possessed as property." She touched the silver locket he had given her, which she had worn every day since his return. "And I think I want you to be part of that life." Dalton's expression softened. He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the locket. "I want that too, Deanna, more than I've wanted anything in a very long time." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I need you to be sure, after what you've been through with Frank. I'd understand if you never wanted to marry again." "I thought the same thing," Deanna admitted. "I told myself I was better off alone, but then you came along and showed me that not all men are like Frank, that marriage could be a partnership instead of a prison." Dalton's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Is that what you want? Marriage?" Deanna felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I'm still married to another man. It seems presumptuous to be discussing this already." "Not for long," Dalton reminded her, a smile touching his lips. "And I'm not known for my patience." Deanna laughed, the sound still new enough to surprise her sometimes. "So I've noticed." That night, after Deborah returned and Dalton had gone to sleep on his cot, Deanna lay awake thinking about the future. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine happiness not as a distant dream, but as a real possibility within her grasp. The thought both exhilarated and terrified her. Judge Nathaniel Parker arrived in Cottonwood Springs on a Tuesday morning, bringing with him the full authority of territorial law. A tall, imposing figure with a shock of white hair and penetrating gray eyes, he had a reputation for fairness tempered with a rigid adherence to legal principles. Deanna knew her case was unusual. Divorce was still relatively rare, especially when initiated by a woman, and she prepared herself for disappointment. The hearing took place in the town hall, the closest thing Cottonwood Springs had to a proper courtroom. Deanna wore her best dress, a dark blue that Dalton had once said brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. He sat behind her in the audience section, along with Deborah, Mrs. Whittaker, and, to Deanna's surprise, several other townspeople who had come to show their support. Sheriff Miller presented the signed statement from Frank renouncing his claims on Deanna, along with sworn testimony about the public beating and Deanna's subsequent mistreatment. Dr. Evans reluctantly confirmed that he had treated Deanna for injuries consistent with abuse on at least 3 prior occasions. And Mrs. Johnson, still shaken from the ambush, testified about the attack on her and Dalton, including the attacker's specific mention of Frank Daniels. Throughout it all, Deanna sat with her head high, answering the judge's occasionally probing questions with quiet dignity. When asked why she sought divorce rather than merely living separately, her answer was simple. "Because I want to be free to build a new life, Your Honor. Not merely escape my old one." Judge Parker studied her for a long moment before turning his attention to the documents before him. The room fell silent as he considered his decision. Deanna could feel Dalton's steady presence behind her, lending her strength. Finally, the judge looked up. "In the matter of Daniels versus Daniels, I find sufficient evidence of extreme cruelty to warrant the dissolution of marriage bonds." He fixed Deanna with a stern but not unkind gaze. "Mrs. Daniels, or rather, Miss Deanna Daniels, as you shall now be known, the court grants your petition for divorce. You are free to dispose of your property as you see fit and to enter into contracts under your own name. The marriage is hereby dissolved." A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the room. Deanna felt a momentary dizziness as the words sank in. Free, truly free in the eyes of the law. She turned instinctively to find Dalton, whose face shone with a pride that warmed her from within. Outside the town hall, well-wishers surrounded Deanna with congratulations and kind words. Even people who had once turned a blind eye to Frank's behavior now seemed eager to express their support. The hypocrisy might have angered her once, but today Deanna found she could accept their goodwill with grace. The past was behind her now. As the crowd dispersed, Dalton approached her, his limp barely noticeable now. "Congratulations, Miss Daniels," he said formally, though his eyes danced with private meaning. "Thank you, Mr. Shaw," Deanna replied, equally formal. Then, dropping her voice, "Would you walk me home? I think we have matters to discuss." They strolled together through town, arm in arm, Deanna acutely aware of the curious glances thrown their way. But for once, she didn't care what others might think. Today was about her future, her choices. When they reached her small room, Deanna hesitated at the door. "Deborah won't be back until evening. Perhaps we should wait, Deanna," Dalton interrupted gently. "I've spent 3 weeks sleeping 6 feet away from you with your sister as chaperone. I think we can manage a conversation alone without compromising your reputation." Deanna laughed, relaxing a little as she opened the door. The room was exactly as they had left it that morning, but somehow it felt different now, full of possibilities rather than limitations. Dalton removed his hat as he entered, turning it nervously in his hands. For a man usually so composed, the gesture revealed more than words could have. "Deanna," he began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his approach. "I had a whole speech planned, been practicing it for days." "I'd like to hear it," she said, sitting on the edge of her bed and gesturing for him to take the room's only chair. Dalton shook his head. "It doesn't seem right anymore, too formal." He set his hat aside and came to kneel before her instead, taking both her hands in his. "So I'll just say it plain. I love you, Deanna Daniels. Have since I watched you stand up to Frank that day in the saloon, though I think it started the moment I first saw you in the street." Deanna's breath caught. Though they had danced around the word for weeks, neither had actually said it until now. Dalton continued, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I know you've had your fill of marriage. If you want to just court for a while, or even if you never want to marry again at all, I'll understand. But I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'm here, for as long as you'll have me." Deanna looked into his eyes, seeing there everything she had once thought impossible to find: respect, kindness, and yes, love. Not the possessive, controlling attachment Frank had called love, but something deeper and truer, a love that offered freedom rather than demanding submission. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily now that they had been spoken aloud. "And I don't need more time to know what I want." She squeezed his hands. "I want a life with you, Dalton, as your wife if you'll have me." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing them reverently. "I'd be honored to be your husband, Deanna, but I have conditions." She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Conditions?" "3 of them." Dalton's expression grew serious. "First, I want you to keep working at the seamstress shop if it makes you happy. Your earnings are yours, not mine." Deanna nodded, touched by his understanding of how important her independence had become. "Second," he continued, "I want us to be true partners, equal voices in decisions that affect our life together." "And the third condition?" Deanna asked, her heart full. Dalton's eyes softened. "The third is that you promise to tell me if I ever even unintentionally make you feel afraid. Because I would rather die than become the thing I've spent my life fighting against." Tears welled in Deanna's eyes at the depth of understanding in his words. Without hesitation, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in their first real kiss, gentle at first, then deepening as he responded with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes to my conditions?" Deanna laughed softly. "It's a yes to everything." They were married 2 weeks later in Cottonwood Springs' small church, with Deborah as maid of honor and Sheriff Miller standing up as Dalton's best man. Deanna wore a dress of creamy white that she had made herself, with Mrs. Whittaker's blessing and assistance. The entire town turned out for the occasion, their presence a tacit acknowledgement that this union, unlike Deanna's first, had their full support. As Deanna spoke her vows, her voice clear and unwavering, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of her years with Frank had not vanished, such wounds never completely healed, but they had shaped her into a woman stronger than she had ever imagined possible. A woman who knew her own worth and would never again settle for less than the respect she deserved. And as Dalton slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his eyes full of a love that asked nothing but offered everything, Deanna knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last. "By the power vested in me," the minister proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." As Dalton's lips met hers to seal their union, Deanna heard a whisper of his words from that first day, "Not while I'm breathing," a promise that had changed everything. A promise she knew with bone-deep certainty he would keep for all their days together. 5 years later, Deanna sat on the porch of their small ranch outside Cottonwood Springs, watching as Dalton taught their 4-year-old son Matthew how to brush down a gentle mare. The boy's serious face, so like his father's, was fixed in concentration as he carefully followed Dalton's instructions. Nearby, 2-year-old Sarah tottered around the yard, chasing butterflies with delighted squeals. Deanna's hand rested on her growing belly, feeling the gentle kicks of the new life that would join their family in just a few months. Dalton glanced up, catching her watching them, and smiled that same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. Their life wasn't perfect. The ranch demanded constant work, and there had been hard times, droughts, illnesses, the year when rustlers had taken half their small herd. But through it all, they had faced each challenge together as equal partners in the life they were building. Deanna had continued her sewing work, developing a reputation that extended well beyond Cottonwood Springs. She now taught classes to young women at the expanded schoolhouse where Deborah still served as teacher. Her sister had finally married last year to Timothy, the doctor's former assistant who had opened his own practice in town. As for Frank Daniels, they had heard he'd died in a bar fight in Nogales 3 years earlier. The news had brought Deanna no joy, but it had removed the last shadow of fear from her life. Frank could never hurt her or anyone again. Dalton finished with the lesson and sent Matthew running to the water pump to clean his hands before supper. Lifting Sarah onto his shoulders, he crossed the yard to join Deanna on the porch. "How are my girls doing?" he asked, leaning down to kiss her before setting Sarah beside her. "We're perfect," Deanna replied, making room for him on the bench, "just enjoying the view." Dalton sat beside her, his arms slipping naturally around her shoulders. "It is a fine view," he agreed, but he was looking at her, not the landscape. Deanna leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Stepping between a stranger and her husband that day in town, you could have been killed." Dalton was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not for a second," he finally said. "Best decision I ever made, even with all the trouble it brought." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "Especially with all the trouble, it brought me you, didn't it? You and these little ones." He patted her belly lightly. A man couldn't ask for more than that. Deanna turned her face up to his, still marveling sometimes at the journey that had brought them here. "I love you, Dalton Shaw, and I love you, Deanna Shaw." He kissed her softly, then rested his forehead against hers. "Always have, always will." As the sun set over their small piece of the Arizona territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Deanna thought about the words that had changed her life on a dusty street 5 years ago. "Not while I'm breathing." A promise made by a stranger that had become the foundation of a life she had never dared to dream possible. A life of love, respect, and the quiet joy of being truly free.